How do you give a personal responsibility message while taking account that for some people it's harder to take personal responsibility and the deck is stacked against them?
Well, I think the deck is stacked against everyone to some degree because life is very difficult and we all die.
We've got to do a better job explaining how our ideas apply to young people. But I think that, personal responsibility is pretty cool. There's nothing out of date about freedom.
Harris, what about people that say, well, it's like saying, well, if women are drunk, that it's somehow justification for rape?
Well, personal responsibility is, I think, also what Lou is alluding to, is very important in all of this.
If we can tell somebody they should have taken personal responsibility for something, the one that I see the most more recently, like this is the biggest one because it's in the news now with the president, is student loans. Because unlike the child thing, like if we serve Lunchables to a kid, we're nudging them toward bad habits early and we're nudging them toward consistently bad habits. However, student loans are something where everybody who took a student loan was at least 18. They were technically an adult. Everybody who took a student loan knew it was a loan. It's in the name. So they should have had enough of a knowledge of what they were doing to realize they'd have to pay it back. But also, the logic I've heard is if you're dumb enough to take a $60,000 loan for an underwater basket weaving or liberal arts degree or a degree in the history of Russian ballet, you deserve to be jobless and broke forever. like that is such an obviously awful decision that asking taxpayers to bail you out of your degree and your loan is completely reprehensible and also poor moral character. So we're not going to bust this one so much as we just want to clarify it. We want to know, can we say this is personal responsibility?
Well, can I first say that in other countries where the tax rate is lower, they get free college? Can I say that?
No, because
I'm not.
I think you're lying.
And we have police department and firefighters who are saying you can't give things to everybody, which is a socialist job you can never get fired from. I just like, what? Why would we want to pay more taxes for smooth, and get less college? Anyways, your turn.
We that opens up such a severe can of worms. The idea that like other countries pay less taxes and still get free college. Yes, there are countries and that does exist. But anytime you start arguing that the American system is broken and look at other countries, they do better, we immediately get off the rails because it's people start pointing to all the things that we have that other countries don't have. Well, we have the biggest military in the world, and we have
which is true,
consistently supported wars in other countries, even if we're not involved in them, and we're constantly like we have all these other things that other countries don't have. We this is just my sort of take on this. I think it's because we value personal responsibility more that we don't fund anything that would be seen as us paying somebody else's way. When in reality, a lot of this comes down to we're kind of falling behind in a lot of these areas to other countries.
That goes into being ex-military myself. Policing the world is expensive, right? Having bases all over the world is expensive, but is that part of the personal responsibility that we know best, that we're the tough guys on the street,
Right. Well, the government's response so far to obesity has been, almost literally. Let's start with the Herbert Hoover response, which is personal responsibility. Michelle Obama very briefly tried to attack fast food and processed food, and Michelle Obama ran a campaign where she wanted to overhaul food systems. And then I don't know what lobbyists paid into her budget. There was a documentary about the food industry that literally pointed this out. They're like, she very swiftly changed her message. Like somebody paid into her husband's campaign, and then suddenly she was putting out the message of get moving or go move or something. Her entire campaign turned into individual responsibility. It turned into blaming kids for not being active enough. And mathematically, there's no amount of active that will solve that. Like a kid who eats a normal American diet, who is already, being nudged toward Lunchables and stuff, they would have to be active and be playing basketball and sports and running and playing on the jungle gyms. They would have to be active 13 hours a day. I think it came to be about 13 hours a day, that like you would have to be in physical motion to burn off the amount that we were giving kids as far as calories go. So the government very much tried the personal responsibility excuse with that. Student loans, exact same thing. It was, other countries can afford to have free college. And we're not saying free college is in free underwater basket weaving and liberal arts and Russian history. We're saying free colleges in, there are other countries that have open colleges for trades. They do have elite colleges. They have, there are countries that have colleges where you definitely have to pay to get in. But I think the only country that beats us out for how many students under debt we have is the UK. So like it's us high-fiving the UK and not getting as many students to graduate, and not getting as many people who will be competitive on the job market in the next 20 years. It's us in the UK just high-fiving it while everybody else passes us by. We had a whole episode about the lack of faith that America has lost faith in colleges. Like we hit the tipping point where 50% of parents were not planning to send their kids to college anymore because they wouldn't make their money back. It was a bad equation. But I think the first myth of this is that, back in the 2000s and 2010s, that all these people taking huge college loans were taking it for, art major or weird history subjects or subjects that will never pay itself off. When in fact, art majors only accounted for about 1/3 of all student loan debt. The rest were sciences and trades.
Isn't that funny? Because that's another myth. That's right up there with your farming thing. Doesn't it seem like everyone went to college for something stupid? Oh, they went to, it seems like everyone. Are people just saying that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. That's it. It's like,
I mean,
the myth is, oh, you're an English major. You're one of, 10,000 English majors that took out this loan.
Yeah.
You idiot.
And you're not going to teach it. If you're not going to be a teacher, what a waste of,
I'm gonna go through the numbers. We're gonna read off what people got as far as degrees, and what that put them into as far as debt goes. The major largest median debt for a bachelor's degree is $42,000, and I think that's teachers. People who want to be teachers took on the largest amount of debt. So we're gonna read through very briefly. I'm gonna be quick about this. The 10 degrees with the highest median debt, it is behavioral sciences, so human resources, psychology, things like that. Religious education, culinary arts and related services, so people who want to be chefs. Human services, general. Education, general. Clinical counseling and applied psychology. Literature. So finally, we have an arts, sort of. Natural sciences, physical sciences, music, which is number 9 on this list for bachelors, and then number 10 is architecture. I am not seeing a lot of underwater basket weaving degrees on this list.
No, and the music one, yeah, I'm not trying to stand up for that one, but we do have some of the best music in the world,
Right.
Volume wise, right? The most of the most here, us in England,
Yep.
That's where most of the good musicians come from.
We've got that great London to Seattle pipeline going with the rock scene. Yeah. So when we talk about people who took on liberal arts degrees, they actually, not nearly as many took on liberal arts degrees and couldn't pay it back. Most people who were able to take on extremely high debt, the people who want to be doctors and lawyers, they managed to pay it back. Like a lot of those didn't show up on this list. They were way low on the list, or they were just listed as people who were able to pay it back quickly because they actually got their job. They got their dream job, and it pays well. A lot of the people who ended up having the student debt, they took practical degrees. They took degrees that should have a place in society. But what they found out was that the loaning system was predatory. They never stopped paying off the interest. the degrees that they got jobs in them. They just didn't pay enough to touch the main loan or the principal of the loan. And a lot of this is backed up by, we're going to link a study that talks about how lots of the people still paying off student loan debts actually don't have huge amounts. They fall under the less than $5,000 category. They got stuck with that debt because they didn't get their degree. They came from bad neighborhoods. They're from minority families. They tried to get their degree. They didn't manage it. And the loan stuck around. And they've just been hounded by creditors forever.
Which is terrible with people, and life happens too, right? People they have kids, or get in a car accident, or or one of their family members gets sick. That's a tragedy,
right? If there's a group of people, I'm not going to speak for everybody taking a student loan, but if there's a group of Americans we should be rooting for to improve their lives, and we should be championing them to get an education and to better their lot in life, it's the people who tried to get student loans and tried to pass class. They tried to get through college. They didn't have enough money. They didn't have time. They didn't have enough support. It's the people who failed that we should have a system that can train them into a better job, or to help them. Like Todd and I have done episodes about how every step up in a college degree you get, every level of education, you on average make more in your lifetime. If the people who got into college in the first place and tried to take on these loans in the first place, if they were smart enough to do that, like they passed their tests, they were in, that means they were smart enough to get out of the poverty they were in. And we instead took their money. The companies that run student loan debts, like Navient, none of them are non-for-profit. They're not charity organizations at all. And we suckered thousands of students into doing this.
Don't get him started. He's not exaggerating.
And I'm not one of these people, by the way. If anybody is like, wow, Joe really, really hates student loan debt. I did not have a student loan debt. Like I went to college. I got a grant early on. I have taken classes off and on since in very cheap ways because I'm a cheap bastard. I have never been in student loan debt. This doesn't affect me at all, except for I can recognize when a predatory system exists they have the mandate of the government.
Yeah, just because it didn't happen to you doesn't make it right,
Right.
Yeah, and your situation was different than a lot of people's, like everybody's.
Yeah. And I truly believe I don't side with the young people who say they have no control over this. But I do side with the economists who say that this is going to hold back our country. I don't think taxpayers should be penalized for these kids taking on debt that they obviously couldn't handle. But I really do think that the government allowed several loan companies that are very predatory and very like basically these kids were lied to. And that system existed for decades. Like, it is insane to think that, that was completely unregulated and allowed to happen, and that the government gave their mandate. They gave the okay for these loan operations to exist.
Do you think it's just data, or do you think economists would look at things differently if they'd had a different life?
You mean, like, do they look at it as just data?
Yeah,
or
because to me it seems more political. There's data, but as we know, statistics you can get statistics to say whatever you want, right?
I paid to take a New York Stern class once, and they started the class it was an economy class, and they started by talking about, like, if you're here sitting in this class, New York Stern is the top business school in the world. And they started the class by saying, if you're here, you're never going to have to worry about student loans, or you're never going to have to worry about, like, and they named a bunch of stuff. And they're like, we're going to talk about all of these throughout the curriculum. You guys will never have to deal with this, but you have to understand it so that you understand the market and the economy, and so that you understand how business works. And it shocked me as somebody who's watching from the outside, because I was taking an online course, so I wasn't there. Right. But it was like touching an electric wire to hear them say out loud. They're like, these things will never touch you, but here's the problems that normal people are going to face.
Is that kind of like you're above this? You're, you know,
Yeah.
you're wearing purple. You're the royal family. But for the minions,
Right. And everybody in that class is going to become an MBA or they're going to become an economist. So it's like, yeah, it was hard to hear that and to think about it. But when we talk about personal responsibility, I absolutely do believe it should have fallen to the parents of those students. The parents had just as bad information. The parents are being told that your kid will be unemployable in the future if you don't have a degree. And it's kind of true. And those kids were being told you will for certain make your money back, even if your loan is up to $60,000. There's no way you won't make that money back. You're going to have a 4-year degree. 4-year degrees make serious money, even if it's underwater basket reefing. There's a reason these kids took this loan. We didn't have hundreds of thousands of kids suddenly out of nowhere decide to go borrow a house. Like
right?
they were told by the loan companies and by their teachers and by their parents that this is the best choice they had. They took the loan and they're suffering for it. I don't think the taxpayer should pay that back necessarily. I think maybe we should reconsider regulation and how these loans are handled and what kind of school options are available. I saw a billboard sign the other day. I think it was Kentucky was starting free vocational schools. Wouldn't that kill you if you had paid that much money to go to, you paid $60,000 to attend for one of these vocations college, and then suddenly 20 years later your state opens up a school for it, and it's like, we so desperately need people in trades and carpentry, and we so desperately need electrical engineers that we're giving it out for free.
What about me? Yeah, exactly. Or
Yeah.
the college athletes who a year before didn't get paid and now they're all getting paid. That's not fair. Yeah. But
Right.
doesn't mean you can't change things, right? I mean, you got to change things eventually.
Right. And that's I think that is the answer is we talk about the internal locus of control. The answer hopefully is that a lot of these people now realize that they could have found a way into education without taking a loan and being held by the hand of a predatory company. The best option, hopefully, or in the future, hopefully, will be that every kid that comes of age, we take the serious time to get them tested. We consider all the options. We look at all the schools. You go online and look at online classes. You see how they could accumulate credits through unconventional means. You look at what trade schools have opened up that are effectively free or cheap. I know parents do this, but underprivileged or impoverished parents don't have the knowledge to do this. That's basically coming down to knowledge of opportunity. It's opportunity hoarding. It's, do you know to look for these things, or do you just listen to the person who sounds highly educated and is offering you a steep loan and telling you you'll be able to pay it back eventually? Next on our list, unfortunately, Todd and I both have some experience with drugs and alcohol and addiction generally. I'm not going to get super specific unless you want to, but
we're overweight addicts. You're barely making this. We're not so it's terrible. He is not my representative.
I thought I was your legal representation in all things.
Some of these things should be fairly obvious. This overweight alcoholics.
Yeah. No, this is. I'm only mentioning this because we're going down the list of things that affect either a large portion or majority of people. At some point, almost everybody will dabble with addiction or alcohol. For me, I have now lost 3 primary family members and several secondary family members to strictly addiction. Not like addiction affected them and it also accompanied their deaths. They died from addiction.
And I have 2. I have 2 very, very direct. Yeah.
Yeah. And pretty much every time it happens, even the people who know how addiction works and even the family members who understand that component, it's still hard to not blame them directly. It's still hard not to say that it is personal responsibility. This is another one where it's really hard for me to wrap my brain around, to think that, how can it not be your responsibility? You put the thing in your mouth, like you physically picked it up and stuffed into your mouth. How is that not you doing it?
I, I couldn't agree with you more, and it's hard here to, especially in Portland, Oregon, where you see the homelessness, and homelessness is all over the world, I know, but where's the blame go from? The big one is they have mental health issues. Well, how much of the mental health issues is from addiction overdoing it, So it's like, and
Right.
then what do we owe to help? And then how much a lot of people have helped me. So it's like, I don't know. I don't know. What do you think?
We had an episode a long time ago. Like, we've had an episode about addiction. We've also had an episode about drinking. The thing that kept coming up throughout all those were the short-term solution is telling somebody you're an addict and getting them into counseling or getting them to AA, or taking personal responsibility. You honestly can't get sober and off of an addiction without taking some personal responsibility. As a large system, though, there's a reason we have such a high rate of addiction. Like we're not talking about you point to an individual and say you did this to yourself. We're talking about, why don't we have a system that makes that's healthy enough, or that encourages more people to take healthy choices? Why don't we have more nudges toward unaddictive behavior? Why don't we have more nudges toward being social and toward being economically stable? Why don't we have more nudges toward healthy things that will get people out of addiction? And those things I mentioned just now seem unrelated, but we covered many studies in those past episodes about how, people who live in economic stability, less likely to be addicted. People who
Right.
live with a good social network or support network, less likely to be addicted or stay addicted. People who receive the support they need medically, less likely to get addicted, less likely to stay addicted. So
Well,
it's
and
one of those things.
you see that
Yeah.
in the rural America too, right? With less opportunities and less support for addiction treatment, where methamphetamines and opiums just go. The percentage of users is shocking, right? And it's been pushed off on, they have nothing else to do, so they don't do anything, and that's not true, right?
Right. It's this is their hobby. It's funny to think that, like, there are a percentage of Americans who think that
Yeah,
they
with
got addicted because this is what they do. This is
sores
their
on their
version of
face, and like they're happy, right? Like this is a choice. They look terrible.
right.
They literally look like zombies. They're very unhappy. You can tell that by appearances,
Yeah, nobody sits around and they look over and they see a 1,000 piece puzzle box, and then on the same shelf is like just cocaine and opioids. Nobody does that. It is really a system of, like, they have a social lack in their life. They have a huge gap. They're having the worst time economically. They don't know if they're going to have their house in a month, and so that is the escapism that is available to them. And if we could nudge people with a support system, we that would be great. However, I mean, this is another one where we have to put a rating on it, because we know that you don't get out of addiction without having personal responsibility. You
Right.
have, yeah, you have to have an internal locus of control.
You gonna say 5 out of 10?
I'm gonna go 5 out of 10.
Okay,
I honestly think
that's kind of
locus
weak,
of
though.
control.
That's
Yeah.
that's the coin flip. That's kind of weak. You should either go 40 or 60, right?
The problem is I started so low with the obesity thing. I'm like, but that one's so obvious. It's not like they're putting cocaine on lunch trays, but they are putting Lunchables on lunch trays in school. So, yeah, I'm gonna give that one a 5 out of 5. Here's one that Todd and I just talked about. Was this 2 weeks ago? Medical debt.
Okay.
We did an episode about how NPR found out that 40% of Americans have medical debt currently in some form. It's something they're paying off. It's something they're about to pay off. It's something they're working on. And medical debt is now the number one cause of bankruptcy. So much so that, quote unquote, medical bankruptcy is a top Googled term, even though there's no such thing. And the answer that most politicians give, especially here in Texas, is, why did they not save enough? Like, it's the individual's responsibility to have a savings and be ready for a rainy day and be ready for, they break an arm.
Yeah.
or they need
For your colonoscopy or your colon cancer, you want to have some, $800,000 put away for that, and then your your breast
right.
cancer for your wife, you want another million for that, right?
Right. It is your personal responsibility to take care of your health. There can't be something more personal that you can take responsibility over than your own health. And it is so key. Why wouldn't you set aside that extra money? However, here's what Todd and I talked about last week. The medical billing system has become an unregulated nightmare.
Yeah,
And the reason,
what
go ahead.
percentage of it has errors? Is it like 80% of it? 80% of medical bills have errors, and the Attorney General of the United States had a overbilling that he couldn't even mediate.
Right. And the system is set up to be predatory, because I found out that here in Texas, the Attorney General no longer, like, he refuses to penalize any medical biller. So like if somebody complains that their hospital overcharged them, or if somebody complains that a medical system is overcharging or being predatory, or straight up making stuff up to give out $5,000 bills, it goes to the top. It goes to the state's, the highest law in the land says that they're not going to bother with it. They are not going to address the issue. And a lot of other states have done the same. There's a reason why this isn't just a Texas issue. It is America. The number one cause of bankruptcy is now medical debt, and the number one cause for a lot of states, or the number one reason to be in a small claims court, is because a hospital sent your debt to court, to collections. So courts, small courts, and judges are getting burnt out. They're complaining, and they're getting burnt out on how much they see of medical collection and medical debt being what's taking people to court.
And it's become a subcategory for attorneys, a lucrative one and a busy one. They can have their full practices. It's just selling people's medical debts, or trying to get not settle them, but get them fairly billed.
Right. Patient advocacy has become an entire field, and it's had to spring up in the last 2 years. This is such a recent issue. I can see why people are like, it's on you to save for your own health crises. The reason why that used to be like that was good advice just 5 years ago, honestly. Now the medical billing system has such strong lobbyists and such strong sort of representation, that they have a Wild West free reign to charge people as much as they want. And there's literally no recourse except to take it to court. And if courts are drowning in medical debt cases, then that's not much of a recourse. You're just going to end up paying for, every time you go to the ER, or every time you have a major hospital bill, it's just going to be inflated by 2 to 3 times what it should be. And during that episode, Todd and I talked about, there are websites that walk you through the process a patient advocate does. They walk you through, personal responsibility has shifted from you should have a couple $1,000s saved for an emergency medical bill. It's now shifted to you should be personally responsible and know how to fight a medical bill. You should be personally responsible enough to look through your bill, make sure they're not overcharging you, fight it when they are, because they are every time. Call them, send letters. Like it's that much of a detailed process. I'm not, that's not, would you call it inflating, what we read? It really is the standard practice now. You have to be willing to do that pretty much every time you get a major bill.
So this has to be a 9 out of 10, or what do you got?
For when we talk about how much control somebody has over how much control somebody has over the thing that befalls them, the rainy day. Medical companies are now designed to make it rain on you. It's no longer a rainy day fund. It's you're going to get rained on every time you go to get a bill. So I'm putting that at a 1 out of 10. You have the least control over that, because you have to go to get checked up. You have to go to the hospital. You have to respond to an emergency. You do not have a choice.
I was thinking the other way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm with you, because I'm at 9 out of 10. So yeah, 1 out of 10. I'm with you.
Yeah. How much control we actually have.
It's out of
over
your
it.
control. Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost
The
100%.
answer,
You'd be lucky if it didn't, or you'd just be a very healthy person. If you've been going to the hospital and like a regular lifespan, you're going to this is gonna happen to you too. It's gonna happen to all of us.
right. And that's kind of what we're getting at is there's a repeating theme here. It's here's another field where we have made it, or here's another field where the people who are running a bad system have tried to use Herbert Hoover's rugged individualism against us. It's they have managed to get politicians to agree that everybody should have a rainy day fund set up. Nobody should, nobody should squirm under a $5,000 medical bill until it happens to them, until it literally happens to the attorney general. And he's like, what's this about? Which that was what our episode was about, is the attorney general being shocked at his overpriced medical bill and his inability to fight it. I don't want to dwell on this one too much either, because we have had now, I think, 4 episodes about housing. But another one that we put onto people that we claim it's their personal responsibility to solve. It's homelessness because you don't have the money for a house, or it's living with parents because you don't have the money for a house, or it is now the boomers who lose their house because of medical debt, or sell their house and then they no longer have anywhere to live. I used to just say this was young people like millennials. It's like, well, they didn't plan ahead. They didn't save enough to get a down payment on a house. They didn't save enough to start setting up their future. But now it's becoming most generations. It's now, well, millennials didn't plan ahead, and those damn boomers, they didn't save enough in their retirements either. And neither did the people in between them who are losing their houses right now. Like, I don't know who to blame anymore. Like, I don't, because it's lost its generational flavor. It's now becoming an issue where, well, who can we say it's individual responsibility when investment companies buy up all the single family housing stock and then turn those into rental units? Can we blame the individual when companies harass homeowners into selling and then price them out of the market when they do sell? Can we blame individual responsibility when people can't compete with buying a house that's $300,000 in cash outright in some counties?
Right, or people who are younger families, in their 30s, who have the 6%, 8% down that they need, but all the cash offers are coming in from corporations. Yeah. You can't compete with,
Right. And that's another one where I'm going to just put that as a 2, maybe. You can save a lot for a house in the future. You can take personal responsibility. You can get, if you have a really good job and you are very careful, you can absolutely buy a house. There's plenty of people doing it right now.
But it depends. Now with interest rates going to where it is it affordable? The system of mortgages that we have set up, is it going to be affordable? How much do you have to make and to live just for shelter? I think it's a 1.
Okay. Yeah, I would say that's probably true. And rent prices are so incredibly high. Like, again, this is another thing where housing is unregulated. We don't really have enough people making housing stock to satisfy the need of it. And we don't have many people, like, when I say housing is unregulated, there are people in New York screaming at me like, how dare you? Housing is very regulated. I can't raise my rent rates to
that's
be
an
reasonable.
Outlier, though. That's very rare. Yeah.
We're speaking generally as a country. We are living in a time where, rents are at when rent is over half of what the average person can make, and to buy a house, it exceeds what you can save. Like, the down payment takes 10 years.
Which affects how much you could save, right? It's all connected.
We're looking at this as sort of the broad, can we blame everybody and say everybody didn't take enough personal responsibility? This is another one where, like, there are outliers, there are smart, tricky, interesting, clever ways to do it. But just generally speaking, this is another thing where we are sabotaging our economy by shifting blame to personal responsibility rather than the unregulated Wild West shit show that's going on right now. When Lehman Brothers tried to shift this blame, we talked about, we've written in the book about Lehman Brothers and the 2008 crash. When Lehman Brothers tried to say that they crashed the market and they destroyed their own company, and they sold bad mortgages, and they got people to invest in and take on loans in housing that they could never pay back. That's what Lehman leaned on. They said specifically, they're like, well, sure, almost everybody is defaulting on those loans that we gave out, knowing that they were predatory loans, but they should have taken more personal responsibility. That if they knew they couldn't do it, even though we told them they could, they should have known that. They should have seen through our lies, and they should have had more, financial, understanding. And this was responded with eye rolls. The chairman of that hearing, Waxman, said that this is a system where companies are privatizing the profits and socializing the losses, because when a company goes under, or when people fail, or when large systems like this fail, what ends up happening is the taxpayers have to bail everybody out. And we have gotten away from that. Nowadays, we live in a system where, like, after 2008, we all got mad at the bailouts happening with the banks, and we said never again. But we're still having to bail everybody out. When everybody gets wildly unhealthy from eating Lunchables from age 5, the taxpayers are the ones that have to bail them out, because if you don't have medical insurance, hospitals can't turn you away. You're just going to live in debt until you declare bankruptcy.
Yeah, and I think the personal choice, the option, especially when we're talking about financial stuff. I have a friend who's a project manager at a subprime credit card company, and these are loans $300 to $500. These are people who are with lower credit scores, and when the COVID money came in, all of their profits went way up because everyone paid off their cards. That was one of the first things they paid on when they started getting COVID money. And that's against the public of, oh, you're giving this to people, they're not going to do the right thing. One of the very first things they did was paid off their debt so they could be responsible and use it later when they needed it.
Right. That's still crazy to think about, that like you have proof that everybody showed personal responsibility as quickly as they could. And
as soon as they had that option. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet we still spread the rumor that the stimulus packages are what buried the economy, not everything surrounding it, and deregulation.
They're just to buy, yeah, exactly. That they're just to buy Nikes, to buy more Jordan shoes, and that's not the case.
Right. And that's the same thing as if companies turn us all into renters, renting at the highest price, and we end up homeless for it. Well, who pays for the homeless and their emergency services and the damage they do and all that stuff? That's another system where, like Waxman said, we are privatizing the profits, the companies that make the rent money, and we socialize the losses. Like we socialize those losses in the form of the taxpayers have to pay for all the emergency services that go toward the homeless. And if we bankrupt people out of medical debt, taxpayers bear the brunt of that too. When after that person's assets are liquidated and they go through classes and they have to do all the things to meet the requirements to bankruptcy, the rest is picked up by the taxpayer. So the idea that we don't want to become socialists and we don't want to support all these people and we want them to take into personal responsibility, yet we nudge them toward the worst outcomes in all of these cases because there is a company paying lobbyists as much money as possible in these circumstances.
Follow the sheep to your death, right?
Right. Yeah, I just want to say, I know we've talked about this before. I wish we could untie politics from all this stuff, but every single one of these things is become a political talking point on the right or left. Like I mentioned Michelle Obama. If you go through this list, everything that we blame on individual responsibility, one of the political sides at some point has been paid a tremendous amount of money and they've turned it into a talking point of, well, we don't want to support those people. They didn't take enough responsibility. It's crazy to me that has gone back all the way to Herbert Hoover, like that this has always existed. There's always a politician, doesn't matter what side he's on. There's somebody willing to say this is strictly the individual's problem.
Well, I think you're talking about the Michelle Obama to step in is the one where she did a anti-campaign for fast food for children, but then all of a sudden some lobbyist money came in and that was shit canned, and it was let's exercise more.
Yeah.
Is that the one you're speaking of?
That is exactly what I'm talking about. Did you? Okay, so I want to kind of like start wrapping things up, sort of, about regulation. If everybody thinks that I'm pro-regulation, that is not the case with most things. I used to be a libertarian. I
I think you're a
believed
5 is what
wholly
I think.
in the free market. Yeah.
If I was judging, it depends.
Let me put it this way. I believe strongly in Ayn Rand's notion of you create a good product, that product becomes successful, you sell it, you beat your competitors, you get rich, and the people around you, your workers, your community, everybody you pay a fair wage, that enriches everybody around you. So like in a true free market, I believe all this works. That's not how businesses are running today. Businesses today, as we have talked about, like business by business, find a consumer or find a service your consumer can't live without, like healthcare or housing or education or addictive substances or children's food. And then you pay politicians until the laws either allow only you to supply that product, or the only box people can check are the box that selects your product. And that's how you get money. Like that is the hack for the American economy. It's not make Reardon steel or make a better product. It's lobby until you're the only product people can select from. And I don't know, maybe people have turned the corner on regulation. I don't like using the R word, but I'm starting to weirdly side with the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, just this once, who is saying that we're due for housing regulation. I don't know. I think I'm going to burst into flames if I talk about this too much more, but yeah, let's can we sort of like cleanse our palates with 10 minutes of talk about like what is internal locus of control and what is personal responsibility? Like what does it actually look like?
What's the takeaway? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, did you ever read Grit by Angela Duckworth?
Yeah, one of my favorite books. Yeah, I just referred that to a friend, and she was raving about it. I just gave her that book, and she was raving about it as well.
That is such a great book. There's a part in it that talks about like military training and them taking psychology to military training and football training and basically just taking the notion of optimism around to everybody. And one of the key points of being a good optimist is thinking that you can change things, that the world around you is you have some control. It is changeable. Problems that you face are temporary. They're also changeable if you put in enough effort over time. I really do believe that internal locus of control is probably the best, most powerful tool we have in the psychology toolbox. It is the root of stoicism, the idea that you have to be aware of what is under your control and what is under your power, and you have to be aware of what isn't. And if it isn't in your control or power to fix, you either have to move around it or find a way to live with it.
And Angela Duckworth's a University of Penn Ivy League professor, and she's got a psychology degree, and she's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I only bring her up as one of the more well-known sources for grit and optimism and internal locus of control. There are many, many books about it. Obviously, Daniel Kahneman did not write about nudging because he wanted to discourage people. That is something about your locus of control. The idea that you should understand or you should get a good sense of, what will I do if I have fast food in front of me? What will I do if I have, drugs in front of me? What will I do if I can't save money for a house? Well, then you nudge yourself. You take away the bad defaults if you can. You make the good things your default selection. You put around your environment only things that will support your goals. The idea that you would look at his research at the idea that, companies can nudge us into terrible things, and they do because they get a lot of money from it. You can't look at that and be defeated. You have to look at it as you have an internal locus of control. It can help you, can pull you out, but also understand that the population numbers, the majority of us who support the economy, will not be able to do that without training and understanding. I mean, think about how much knowledge it took us to just get through this episode, how many like corners we had to peek in, how much education we had to tap into, how many resources we had to have on tap to
Yeah,
get this far.
we had to build up to it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a process, and that's without the rest of life, in the way too, right?
You can't have a 5-year-old getting a Lunchable be expected to understand all that, and you can't have even an 18-year-old who has gone through high school. They still won't get this. Like you can't expect them to make life-changing decisions without setting up a good nudge in front of them first.
Shouldn't that be a class growing up? We talk about these classes that like real classes that we need and what we can use. Can we use one on things you can control and things you can't? I mean, because it's something that's anytime you deal with any kind of addiction thing, they talk about span of control and what you can and that you can't control everything, what you can control. But you have to go through some kind of a bankruptcy, either financially or emotionally. You have to hit bottoms before you start working on this stuff, right?
We just have a class where we simulate all the bad things that can happen in life, and then we teach them about how much control they have over each one of those.
We start it's talking to kids about child support and cancer. It's been a real negative class, right? Real stoic.
That's it. It would just be like a stoic life class, and it would be like when kids used to have to raise a baby for class. They take an egg home or they take a doll home.
Yeah.
You have the same thing. Like your kid would get home and instead of an egg or a doll, you'd be like, "What are you doing?" And you're like, "Well, today I have an addiction and it's crippling. I have to deal with it on paper." Yeah. I'm dealing with. They gave me a medical bill at school, and it's way more than I could ever pay.
I have sleep apnea. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Deregulation caused the Wall Street crash that led to the Great Depression. After the crash, politicians from both parties agreed to put chains around the legs of big banks. The Glass-Steagall Act passed the House with a vote of 262 to 19. That was back in 1933. For 50 years, these limits on banks remained in place. However, throughout the 80s, banks like Citicorp, JP Morgan, Chase, and Travelers lobbied politicians, throwing money at candidates and arguing that the Glass-Steagall Act was unfair. These banks engaged in mergers, exploited loopholes, and paid $300 million in lobbying efforts just to get rid of this one tiny piece of Depression-era regulation. In 1999, under President Clinton, Glass-Steagall was repealed. Banks were off the leash. In 2008, those same banks asked the American taxpayers to bail them out. AIG, Bear Stearns, and Lehman Brothers blamed individual homeowners for defaulting on their mortgages. They claimed in public hearings that if the working American had been more responsible, the crash wouldn't have happened. Meanwhile, those same banks had been begging workers to take loans that were so massive, on occasion, they exceeded the total value of the homes they were borrowing against. Again, after the 2008 crash, regulation was put back into place. This time it was the Dodd-Frank Act. Over the course of the last 10 years, Wall Street has paid hundreds of millions again to repeal Dodd-Frank, arguing that by limiting how much financial risks large banks can take, the American voter is limiting their potential growth as a business. In 2018, the Dodd-Frank Act was partially repealed, allowing small and medium banks to start engaging in riskier ventures. Only a handful of the largest banks currently are still subject to the strictest rules. Each year, these largest banks spend millions to completely repeal regulation. So, what is their reasoning for trying to repeal? They may be too big to fail, but the individual taxpayer is never too small to blame.
You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where I have research links, show notes, feedback, and blog articles for each of our episodes.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.